Okay, hello everyone. Sorry for the delay in setting up there. So I'm here to present my presentation, um, clickbaity titled, What Does Surprisal Have to Do with Information Status? And my tentative answer is a slightly frustrated, nothing much or nothing obvious, but you might disagree. So I take to doing this too long, didn't watch just to front my conclusions and then find out how we get there. So basically, summary of this paper is surprisal from transformer language models, as we've seen in the previous talk and in quite a lot of talks, is tempting to use as a continuous measure of information status, given transformers' ability to pay attention to long-range previous context. However, we find in our experiments that surprisal is not actually much at all predicted by information status, at least in the experiments we run, and that more trivial linguistic information such as parts of speech, word frequency, are much better predictors of information of surprisal, and probably what surprisal is like responding to, and that this information status itself is very well correlated with parts of speech, which provides an intuitive baseline that we should pay attention to when doing this. So those are my thoughts. Now see how we get there. So basically, yeah, language model surprisal, as we know, is quite often used as a measure of difficulty of processing a language. We think in terms of information density, we might think of the extent to which something is unexpected, contentful, as predicting how difficult that's going to be to process. And this kind of makes it a very useful measuring thing in cognitive linguistic measures such as, for example, reading times or gaze duration. This is often extended then to novel and unexpected information. I'm quoting a paper by Schoenfeld in 2024. I don't think they put a lot of emphasis on this phrase, on novel and unexpected. I don't know. They didn't specify obviously whether they meant like, in terms of information status, givenness or newness, or the topic focus meaning of novelty, of novel and unexpected. But generally, yeah, it's one of their points of this paper was that surprisal is if the information is surprising, then it is in some sense novel, unexpected. And then that that has the implicit linking hypothesis that new information should be more surprising. Or new mentions should be more surprising. So obviously, as we've said, transform-based language models can pay attention to previous long-distance contexts and modeling next word probabilities. So, in theory, our thinking went, it would make intuitive sense to think that whether a referent is given, as in it's been mentioned before. So, for example, there was a cat sitting on the chair, or, it's new, like, for example, there's a cat sitting on the chair, or given, the cat got up and ran away. We should be able to, yeah, we should be able to expect that this would kind of have an impact on the surprisal values we see, and possibly from there, even to be used as a continuous measure of information status. A previous study by Loisiga et al. Probed two large language models to test, it's a slightly different setup, but to test whether information states of mentions in English could be predicted from the hidden layer parameters of two large language models. That was GPT-2 and Transformer XL in English, and they found that it could. They found that yes, this was true, suggesting that there is some encoding of information status within the parameters of large language models. So for us, so what I wanted to do here was then, as preliminary, to find out if information status itself is predicted by context-free features. Basically, this stems from my skepticism, from my skepticism towards this. I started to wonder if what we were really looking at was something more trivial. So yeah, to see if information status is predicted by context-free features, and does language model Surprisal respond to the information status of mentions as opposed to these context-free features. So yeah, those were the things we wanted to, those were things we just wanted to test. And how did we do that? Simple, very simple experiments, simple as simple could be. It's basically just two regression experiments. For the first experiment, for finding if information itself, to what extent information itself is correlated by context-free features, we just used a logistic regression with UPOS, with universal parts of speech, and DEPREL as predictors of information status, and we reported F1 score. F1 score in this. And this experiment gives us our baseline. The second experiment to see whether Surprisal is actually predicted by information status as opposed to other things. We used Poisson regression with R2 score as a reported measure. So yeah, super simple. The data, so as we mentioned this before, and I'll explain it a little bit more. Keepinf is a parallel corpus we've been building. It's built on top of a Keep Plus corpus, which has the 40 aligned UD parsed languages. Well, aligned as in parallel data, I should say. And on top of that, we have 7 languages where we have explicit information status annotation, gold data done by humans. Those being Chinese, English, Hindi, Indonesian, Portuguese, Turkish, and Ukrainian. It's in CoRefUD format, which is similar, and it has a similar annotation scheme to GUM. Like Julius and Toshiki, we focus purely on the information status layer on the binary given or new. A mention can be given, or it can be new, or it can not be a mention. The model we used for this was MGPT. It's an autoregressive model, multilingual autoregressive model, which allows us to run it on all of our languages. We use the default context size of 512 and a stride of 256. Context size meaning how many previous tokens it has access to. Yeah, so this is our modest setup. Okay, so the results of our experiments. The first experiment shows, this is to show whether to what extent information status is correlated with or like predicted by context-free measures, and unsurprisingly, very well in basically every language in here. Our column on the left here, ViewPOS, tells us we get a 0.84 F1 score, telling if a mention is given or new, purely based on its part of speech. Dependency relation is a less informative feature, but still also quite well predictive of it. We tried interactions and independent with interaction and independent, and it really made very little difference, as you can see. So UPOS is the strongest predictor. There's not much more you get from dependency relation. And this is what we find. So it's sort of intuitive when you think about it. The pronouns have strongly correlated with givenness. That's sort of what they are. It's a reduced form mention of an entity that's previously been encountered. And in every language, this is a very strong correlation. Similarly, nouns correspond heavily to new information. And my thinking is this is largely because of the heavy presence of singletons, single entities that are encountered once and sometimes never seen again in the corpus. Proper nouns have surprisingly quite little weight either way. So this tells us that the information status to begin with is heavily correlated by parts of speech, and any effect is any kind of effective information status on surprise is probably going to have to be separated from this. Experiment 2, similarly, we found so UPOS here, again, parts of speech. To what extent is that predictive of surprisal? Well, fairly low still, but there's quite a clear effect of parts of speech on information status, and importantly, excuse me. That is far in excess of information status in the second column. When we have an interaction of the two, again, we see that it's very close to what we got from UPOS alone. This is telling us that really information status is, if there's anything that that Surprisal is responding to, it's much more UPOS than information status. Moving on along, we also had the effect of frequency, as you can see here. And it's kind of intuitive, again, that frequency being a continuous measure, word frequency of mentions being a continuous measure, this should have a better fit to Surprisal, also a continuous measure. But it's still quite remarkable, and again, a fairly intuitive observation. The more frequent a word is as a completion, the more the lower its surprisal is likely to be. So our conclusion from this experiment, I intended this sort of as a check to relying too heavily on surprisal as a measure of information status or the newness of content, and that despite correlating very well with other linguistic measures, cognitive linguistic measures, surprisal does not seem to be a reliable continuous measure of information status. There's more context-free information that's much more relevant, and we always need to disentangle this effect from any conclusions we make about surprisal. If I still have time, I will say that there is much more to do on this. You'll observe, obviously, we only used one model. This was a quick preliminary experiment that ran on my laptop. And it could well be that, for example, with other parameter sizes, we might find more effects. There are more in-depth probing tasks we can do. And my feeling as well is that surprisal is a single number coming from billions of parameters, and that just because we don't see this information floating to the top in surprisal doesn't mean that it's not encoded somewhere within the models. So that's it. That's my simple experiment. I welcome your questions. Thank you.